Is anybody out there? Anybody?
We are College Hill Farm.
Welcome back to College Hill Farm. Well, today we're continuing our series on casual and complementary prepping, and we are discussing how or what is the best prepper tool. So let's get at that discussion. If you like this kind of content, this prepping, homesteading, sustainable living kind of thing, be certain to come on over to our channel and subscribe. It lets us know if we're getting the content right and content that you want to see. So do that, and it'll help us to get out more of this relevant content that you might be interested in. Back to the number one tool in a prepper's toolbox. It's not that fancy new device that they've come up with. It's not that unique food storage system that they've come up with. It's not the latest weapon that they've come up with. It's the most important thing that a prepper has that they can apply and use. It's that big old human brain. It's the most important tool and weapon at the same time that you can have. Now, for 38 years, I've been teaching students in the sciences. I've taught them how to think critically, how to be skeptical of the things that they see, and how to decide if something is right or wrong. Now, today they call that critical thinking skills. Some folks call it skepticism. And it is something that every prepper should know. Okay, as a side note, lately they've been terming skeptical thinking as an atheist activity. Be aware, I am not an atheist, but I am a very skeptical person when it comes to the information that I take in. I really want to know if it's right or wrong. Now, I'm going to say something here that most scientists would probably turn over in their grave if they heard me say, but I've been a scientist for 38 years. Science is not the search for truth. Okay? Science is not the search for truth. Science is the search for the best probable truth that's out there. Nobody knows the absolute truth. Absolute truth doesn't exist. You just have the truths that we see and can measure. Science is all about measurement. So when you think about something scientifically, you have to be thinking about ways to measure it. Science is done by creating a theory based on some observation that you've seen. Then you have to create an experiment to test that theory. You have to test it. Then that theory has to predict future events, okay, with some level of accuracy. Now, it doesn't have to be 100% accurate. If the theory does 90% right, then that's a pretty good theory. So that's the way science works. And then you draw conclusions. Did the theory do all these things that it needed to do? Was it successful? You know, that's how you decide if a theory is absolute bullsugar or if it's on the right track. Religion, on the other hand, doesn't require that litmus test. Religion requires that inner feeling that it gives you, that ability to feel comforted. So religion doesn't require this analytical evidence that science does. Let's take an example. My neighbor Ben has an orc in his barn, or he says he has an orc in his barn. So I go over to take a look. Well, he says you can't go in the barn, it's too dangerous because the orc's in there. Well, I looked through the window and I said, well, I don't see him through the window. Well, then Ben tells me that, the orc can be invisible when he wants to be. I said, oh, okay, so that's cool. Then I've got a nice infrared camera up at the house. I can come and put the infrared camera and we'll see his image through the infrared camera. He said, well, no, you can't see his image because He's cold-blooded, so he's the same temperature as the air around him. You see where I'm going here? So obviously, Ben has a creature in his barn that can't be tested, it can't be seen, it can't be proven. You can't prove that something's not there. It's just like ghost hunting. You can't prove that something's not there. You can only prove that something is there. So there's no way to test to see if that orc is in the building. So to skeptical thinking, you have to understand that there's no orc there. You have to come to common sense, understand that there's no orc there, and that Ben, he might need some medical help. What does this scenario tell us about the things in our everyday life, our everyday prepping, the things that we read? Well, rumors are out there. There are always going to be rumors. There have always been gossip and rumors and all these things. Some of those rumors turned into mythology. It's obvious that there's no orc in Ben's barn, but sometimes these rumors, they play on our preconceived notions of the way the universe operates. And we have to get away from our own personal biases. They tend to cause us to want to believe things that fit our own narrative. And you have to be skeptical of your own preconceived biases. Where do you get those biases? Well, you get those biases from your parents, your grandparents, the way you were raised, the way life has treated you. Your parents had an agenda. They wanted to make you the best person they could be. They told you things, even though they may not have been true. Santa Claus and other things like that. Even though they might not have been definitely true, they were good stories that taught a moral object. Okay? So you have these preconceived biases, these notions about the way things really are, when in reality they're not that way. So let's think about that and these biases and how they affect the way we make decisions. There's several types of bias. One is inadvertent bias. It's the bias that we carry with us all the time. The way we look at life, the way we look at the world. Glass is half full, glass is half empty kind of stuff. But then there is the money-driven bias. The bias for making money. And I'll cover that in a second. The bias for making money, or ideologically driven biases. Now, our news agencies are not like they were in the 1950s and the 40s. Make no mistake, our news agencies were full of bias in the 40s and 50s. Okay? They were full of bias in the 40s and 50s. But today, our news agencies have to fill a 24-hour news cycle. So what they do, in order to fill this 24-hour news cycle, they use commentary, because there's not 24 hours worth of news that's relevant to each of us. There's just not. So they fill with commentary, and commentary always has an agenda. Let me say that again. Commentary always has an agenda. Now, some news agencies camouflage their commentary as news. You have to be able to pick that out and go, that's not true, or that's a half-truth, or those kind of things. So bias has a purpose, and sometimes that purpose is nefarious. It's to make money or to promote a certain ideology. You have to be wary of that. You have to understand that it's going on, and you have to look at it from all points of view. Okay, back to the science part. Science and critical thinking does not exist to find truth. Science and critical thinking exist to help us to find out what's utterly untrue. Okay? It helps us to find out what's utterly untrue. Not necessarily what truth is. Nobody knows what real, honest-to-God truth is. Some things are the truth, but nobody knows the absolute truth. Now, So you have to question everything that you see. When we do things in science, we look at, does the theory solve a problem that was unsolvable before? Does the theory work in all situations? Does the theory accurately predict what's going to happen in the future? Does it give a closer look at what's probably true? Those are all things that you have to look at a theory. You also have to look at the sources of information that you get. Let's take an example. You've got a racist uncle named Frank, and your uncle makes the best moonshine in Appalachia. I mean, his moonshine is smooth. It's the best stuff in Appalachia. So, while you won't want to get life advice from Uncle Frank about about how to treat other people, you do want to get life advice. You do want to get advice of Uncle Frank about making great moonshine. Okay, there are some things that you can accept, and some things that you have to discard. Okay, those are the things that you have to look at when you look at your news agencies. But the one thing, as far as being skeptic, that you have to do is you have to look at your source. And if your source is biased in one area, you have to question its bias in another area. Even an area that you think is not biased, you still have to question it and look up the research for yourself. I hope that makes sense. Now, some scientists have agendas too. Some scientists will practice junk science that's not peer-reviewed, and it's just bad science, okay? Turmeric, that's a good example. Let's talk about turmeric. Many YouTubers and others tout turmeric as this wonder drug that does so many things, antioxidants and all this stuff. Now, those YouTubers, like me, are on YouTube, and they get paid for the number of clicks they get, the number of people who watch the advertisements, yada, 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 okay? So there's an agenda there. Just like I have an agenda here is doing this video, but I also have an agenda of trying to get you to think critically and understand that I have an agenda and that everybody else on YouTube has one too. Some of their agendas are not malicious. They're just agendas. Some YouTubers will take and put on outlandish claims in order to get more clicks, claims that are definitely not true, but they're not really going to hurt nobody. So they're definitely not true. They'll put on outlandish thumbnails to get you to click. They'll do all kinds of different things. Some of y'all call them clickbaiting. All right, they do that in order to get you to come and watch commercials and click on their channel and that kind of thing. Sometimes they make very outlandish claims. But turmeric is a good example of a lot of the outlandish claims that have been made on YouTube and online. There are a lot of online misleading things that you could really look at. And these people will cite scientific studies. Okay? They'll cite scientific studies saying turmeric was good for this or good for that or all those things. They'll cite those scientific studies. Don't be afraid to go look up those scientific studies. That's where critical thinking comes in. Okay, when you go to these studies, you find out that in order to have the health benefits that these things are purporting, you have to eat 4 pounds of turmeric a day. Okay? 4 pounds of turmeric a day. But when you dive into the study and you read about what they actually tested, they didn't test turmeric at all. They tested one of the components in turmeric. Okay, the other components in turmeric may be bad for you. Okay, so be careful what you look for. The devil is always in the details. Now, your number one thing is your brain. Use it. People on YouTube, people on the internet, they have an agenda. A website costs money. Okay? Some people do it for hobbies. I had a hobby website plenty of times. But most of the websites that are Google searchable that you're going to come up on, they're there to make money. That's their purpose. So keep that in mind when you search these websites. When you go to the rumor sites, you know, they're there to create chaos, promote an agenda, a political agenda, a public agenda, a nefarious agenda. You just never know. And you have to take all those with a grain of salt. Can you prove anything that it said? Is it just conjecture? Is it just somebody's opinion? Does it state that an admiral stated this? Which admiral? When? What was it in context to? Okay? You have to look at all those things. Let's take a good example. Our media even. Our media. When we look at our sources, our news, both sides, whether it's right or left wing or center or whatever, most of them in their news reporting portions have fairly truthful information. But then they disguise so much of their news reporting as commentary, or so much of their commentary as news. So you have to be able to discern away from that. Here's a good example. And all of us physicists, for years, we've laughed at this. It's been a running joke in the physics community for a long time. Since 1970, we have been 30 years away from nuclear fusion. Okay, in case you haven't noticed, 1970 was 50 years ago. The other day, I heard a physicist say, well, we're 30 years away from nuclear fusion. You see where I'm going. Okay, there's a bias there toward the science. They think, well, you know, science is doubling ever so often and blah, 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 blah. But it's didn't. It's never materialized. It's always 30 years away. And it's a running joke within the physics community. What are the takeaways that we can glean from this thought process? Well, first off, the number one takeaway, most rumors are not true. Okay? Most rumors, they're not true. There's no basis of truth. They have used your bias against you. Most social media memes have an agenda. Okay? They have a reason for putting on this or that or the other. Know that they have an agenda. Know that they have a bias. And some of the worst things they can do is give you only a half-truth. Most of those, don't trust any of them. You have to look up and see if those are actually real. Most people just click on it and share it to their link because they never thought about it. It fits within their bias and they're good with that. Don't do it. Preppers can't afford to not know what's the most truthful thing. It'll get you killed. Now, number 3. People will lie to make money. The richer you are, the more likely you are to tell a falsehood to make more money. Corporations do it all the time. They tell falsehoods, they tell half-truths. Pay attention. 4. Most people are decent-hearted people, but they're all flawed, just like you and me. I'm flawed. I'm not above making a mistake. I'm sure I've probably made a mistake or two doing this video. I've made plenty of mistakes in previous videos. Okay, so we're all flawed. So you can understand when somebody makes a mistake or when somebody's thinking incorrectly. We're all flawed. Number 5. Desperate people will say and do anything. Desperate people will say and do anything. And number 6, pay attention to your biases. Your biases is your number one way of getting stuff wrong. So don't be afraid to listen to what other people have to say. Don't be afraid to listen to 2 or 3 different news agencies. Don't be afraid to do that. But look at them, how they report on the same topic. Okay? Look at them how they report on the same topic. Whether it's Newser or Fox or CNN or MSNBC, look at how they report. CBS or ABC, even the national news, New York Times, the Washington Post, all those different news agencies. Look at how they report on the same thing. And you'll see their pattern bias. It'll be real straightforward and right in your face. But you have to be open-minded enough to see it. The number one takeaway is you need to use that brain.
Mind what you have learned. Save you again.
I will. If you like this stuff, this homesteading, do-it-yourself kind of thing, prepping, be certain to come on to the channel and subscribe. We do this homesteading, prepping, sustainable living stuff all the time. Sometimes one, sometimes 5 videos. Just depends on what's going on in the homestead that week. Now, if you hit the little bell when you come to the channel, it'll notify you when we upload a video. We upload every Sunday. Now, with that being said, it's time for me to get on to the next thing.